Let's do that hockey.
All right, hockey might be gone, but I'm back on the podcast bringing you some prospect talk and chatter. So let's get to it. This is episode 82 of Dobber Prospects Radio. I'm your host, Peter Harling. Just wanted to say that I've been off for a few months, but with everyone on lockdown right now with the whole COVID-19 situation, I'm stuck indoors at my house like everyone else is. Sadly, I don't have any hockey to watch, but that gives me some time to get back into the swing of things with the podcast. So I'm happy to be back and very pleased to have with me in the guest interview coming up in this latter half of this show will be none other than TSN's Director of Scouting and broadcaster Craig Button. You may know him from such former roles as scout for the Minnesota Wild, the director of scouting for the Dallas Stars when they won their Stanley Cup, and he was also the Calgary Flames general manager for about 3 years as well. This will be Craig's second time on the podcast, so I'm elated to have a guest of his caliber come on. He and I will be going over his draft rankings, some draft prospects, comparing maybe some players to NHL Central Scouting's ranking, and just having some general draft prospect conversation. But before we get to that, I'm going to go over my own rankings of the top 31. This was a particularly difficult year for me to do these rankings for a couple reasons. I had a couple of months where I was in between jobs that I had an opportunity to watch a fair amount of hockey, but other than that, it's been very difficult for me this year to get out and see as much hockey as I would normally and would like to. And it also didn't help that the season was cut way short. So I guess everyone's in the same boat that way when it comes to assessing players and prospects and the rankings the like. But most of the final rankings are up right now. A couple of places that I highly recommend would be our own Dobber Prospects rankings. You got Cam Robinson with his overall rankings. Jokki Nevalainen, our Director of European Scouting for Dobber Prospects, has his European draft eligible rankings. Of course, Craig Button's TSN rankings just went up recently as well. Sam Cosentino for Sportsnet does one. Love his a lot. Mike Morial from NHL.com did a ranking as well. Big fan, as you know, of Russ Cohen. You can find his top 31 on his website called Sportsology. The draft analyst, Steve Kornianis, good friends with Steve. His draft rankings recently went up as well. His are very good. HockeyProspect.com, of course, is, pretty much the best when it comes to this kind of stuff. So there's a few for you to look over as well. You can find those all online real quickly. I'm also going to be doing a few more episodes coming up. I'm going to have Jokki on an episode, and he and I are going to talk all about the European prospects from the draft. So I'll go over several of them in my rankings, but in order to keep this kind of short to sweet, and so you don't have to fast forward through too much to get to Craig Button, I'll just give some bullet points for my top 31. And I'm also planning on having an episode very shortly talking about some players who have signed coming out of college. So NCAA free agents, drafted and undrafted players alike. Just trying to secure a date and some guests for that, but I've been talking to Julie Robenheimer, who is previously on the podcast as well, and an excellent source for college hockey. So, without any further ado, let's get into it and do my Dobber Prospects Radio top 31 ranking for the 2020 draft. So this is not a fantasy ranking, but being a fantasy hockey show, I always put a little bit of slant in favor towards the fantasy upside. So that is a bit of a bias, I suppose, more than anything else. All right, so the first overall ranked player is Alexis Lafreniere. I think the only person I've seen who didn't rank him number one was Cam, and his reasoning behind ranking Lafreniere second and Byfield first is that he thinks that while Lafreniere is the best player right now, when you project long-term down the road, he thinks Byfield will have the bigger impact, being a center, being comparably skilled, having a little bit more size, and his skating, I think, is an advantage as well. And Cam makes all very legit points. I like everything that he says, and he might very well be right. However, I don't have a crystal ball, so I'm going to stick with Lafreniere because, as much as I like Byfield, and I was really heavily leaning towards making him first after my early season viewings of Byfield, Lafreniere is also got pretty good size. He's 6'1", 196, so size not a problem for him. Skating is not a problem. He was dominant at the World Juniors for Canada, so he's elite and dominating in his age group. He is, another difference here between these two is he's in October 01 versus Byfield is in August 02, so they're almost an entire year apart in age, which I think factors heavily in Cam's decision as well, and really leaned me towards putting Byfield first as well. So I'm not really discouraged by the fact that Byfield was struggling at the World Juniors, and that he didn't really get a lot of ice time. And head-to-head again versus Lafreniere at the top prospect game, Lafreniere stole the show, and Byfield wasn't bad, but he was pretty invisible in that game. Those small samples aside, the games that I saw him play live, and there was a couple of them this year, he was just dominant. And he interviewed him. There's a previous podcast, if you missed it, where it's a focus on Quinton Byfield. He compares himself to Evgeny Malkin. I think that's a very good comparison. I think a good comparison for Lafreniere is Jonathan Huberdeau. So anyways, first overall ranked, I go Lafreniere. He's dominated offensively, physically. He's NHL ready now. I don't think that players who are drafted first overall always necessarily should play in the NHL right away, but I think Lafreniere can, and I think that's why he'll go first. So Byfield at second, so he's big, he's skilled, skating is his best asset. It possibly has the biggest long-term upside, and I don't think that he's going to be NHL ready if the season starts next year. I think he needs a little bit more time, another season of development. No one ever said a player was overdeveloped going into the NHL from junior. So 1-2 Lafreniere Byfield. That's pretty common amongst most rankings, and the top 10 are pretty consistent as well. But this is where it gets a little interesting, and you see a bit of variety as to who is ranked third. For me, it's Tim Stützle, left wing German from Mannheim. He's a January 02 born, 6 foot 185, decent size. Compares to Matt Barzal. I just totally fell in love with him at the World Juniors. Loved everything I saw about him. I think he's an impactful player. He's got quick hands, quick feet. He thinks the game very quick. He's a dynamic offensive player. He's the kind of player you can draft, and you'll sell a lot of his jerseys. Fans will love him, and he's going to have a good legacy, I think, in the NHL. So I gave Stützle the slight edge at 3, just ahead of Cole Perfetti. Saginaw Spirit from the OHL. He's also a January 02, a little bit smaller, 5'10", 171, but that's fine. He has got some elite skill and hockey IQ. He's got a strong compete level. The game I saw him against the Ottawa 67s this season, he was the best player in that game on the ice, and it wasn't even close. But that's just one game. But all the other games I saw him play on TV, he stood out and was really impressive as well. I think he's got a tremendous upside, and he could be a top 6 forward, a center or a winger, probably on the wing when he makes it to the NHL. Right behind him is Marco Rossi, Ottawa 67s. He's had an amazing season. He's a September 01, so he's a little bit on the older side for this draft. He's a little bit on the smaller size too, 5'9", 183. But the Austrian center led the CHL in scoring as a draft-eligible player. That's pretty impressive. He had 120 points and 56 games played. And the thing that stands out to me about Rossi is he's very, very impressive. He is outstanding without the puck, and then when he has the puck on his stick, he's even better. He is lights out good. So all 5 of my top 5 players are guys who I think have top 6 NHL potential and are extremely fantasy relevant. And if you get a chance to draft any of these guys in your draft, you'll be super fortunate. Right behind him at number 6, I'm going to go Alexander Holtz, right winger. He's a German playing in the SHL. He's a January 02, and he's 6'1", 192. So he's a goal scorer. He's got a nice variety of shots, quick release on his shots. And of course, in fantasy hockey, goal scorers are at a premium. So there's a lot to like about Alexander Holtz. He's just ahead of number 7. I have Jamie Drysdale, top defenseman in the draft. I think at the beginning of the year, it was him and not even close to anyone else. But I think a lot of defensemen, he hasn't gotten any worse. He had a strong season. He developed. He played his way on to Team Canada World Junior roster. But the gap between him and everyone else closed a little bit. But he's still the hands down number 1. So Erie Otter defenseman, he's an April 02, so that's nice and young. 5'11", 175. His player comparable is kind of like Cale Makar or Morgan Riley from the Leafs. He's got plus skating, plus IQ. He's a better than average offensive defenseman. He can run the power play, and he's got top pairing upside. Maybe not number 1 overall defenseman, depending on who else is on his team at the NHL level, but I think he projects to be a top pairing kind of guy. Number 8, I have Lucas Raymond, a Swedish player playing in the SHL as a draft eligible. That's always impressive. He's a March 02 at 5'11", 170. He's a creative player, very skilled. He's speedy. He's didn't get as much ice time in the SHL as the veterans did, but he still had a very good season, and he had a very good showing at the World Juniors as a 2-time underager. So very impressive season from Lucas Raymond. Strong season there. And he's ranked at number 8. Number 9, I'm going with a goalie in my top 10. Yaroslav Askarov, the 6'3" Russian goalie playing in the VHL. He struggled a little bit at the World Juniors. He had some happy feet. He looked a little shaky on a bunch of plays. He got pulled a couple times. Then that's a small sample size. If that's all you've seen of Askarov, just ignore that. Pretend you didn't see anything. He is a dominant goalie with franchise upside comparable to Pekka Rinne or Carey Price. Don't hesitate to draft him. And rounding out my top 10 is Anton Lundell, the two-way Finnish center. Falls a little bit down on my rankings here compared to some others perhaps, and that's maybe the emphasis on offense and fantasy hockey that I tend to lean towards. But he's got the best defensive game out of all the draft-eligible forwards. He's a two-way center with a very high floor, but a very low offensive ceiling potentially. He's going to have to do a little bit of skill practice and training in that department in order to be a top fantasy relevant prospect. Number 11, just outside the top 10, I'm going back to the Ottawa 67s with Jack Quinn. He's September 01, 6 foot from Canada. He scored 50 goals in the shortened season. So he kind of got buried a little bit on the depth of the Ottawa has. But he's a pretty consistent scorer all season long and has been a pretty steady riser. And it's my understanding that's one of the things that scouts really look for is players who continue to develop and show progress. And Jack Quinn had a really good season in terms of development that way. He scored a lot of even strength goals, which is very impressive. He didn't just cash in on the gravy on the power play with a skilled team. So there's a lot I like about Jack Quinn. He's ahead of another goal scorer, Noel Gunler, the Swedish SHL player. He's born on October, and he's 6'1", 176. Gunlow the Gunslinger, he's a goal scorer. He struggled with some inconsistency this season, but hey, like I said, goal scoring is a premium in fantasy hockey, and while he might have a little bit of risk on his file, which is why he's a little bit lower than some of the other goal scorers like Quinn and Rossi and Holtz, he's still got a lot of upside. So he's 12. Number 13 is the next defenseman on the list, and I'm going US NDP player. That would be Jake Sanderson, left shot defenseman. He's a July 02, so a little on the younger side. 6'1", 186. American born. He's been a pretty big riser this season. But he kind of brings a little bit of everything. He's got it all. He's got size. He can skate very well. He's got some great leadership. He's good offensively and defensively. And he projects to be a really good pro. He's been around hockey. His dad is former NHLer Jeff Sanderson, so a bit of a legacy player there. I really like him, and I think he has a bright future. Number 14, Dylan Holloway. He's Wisconsin rookie, freshman in the NCAA. He's a little bit on the older side for this draft, being a September 01 born, but he was the youngest player in the NCAA, and he had a pretty strong season there. And he was the 2019 CJHL Player of the Year. So a lot of upside with Dylan Holloway. Might be a little bit of development time for him in college before he's ready to turn pro. Number 15, you've got Dawson Mercer from the Q, 6'1", 181. He's a smart, creative, physical forward. Plays center for Chicoutimi in the Q. Number 16, I go to the Dub, another center, and that would be Connor Zary from Kamloops, September 01. He's 6', 177. He had a really consistent season. He was very productive all season long. He didn't have any more than a couple of games, 1 or 2 games, I think it was, stretches where he didn't have a point. So he's a very consistent point producer. He's just kind of not exceptional at anything. I didn't see nothing in his game really ever stood out to me in the games that I watched. He's just kind of a good all-round offensive player. Number 17, Seth Jarvis, again from the Dub. He's a center winger. He's a February 02, 5'10", 180. He had a monster second half. Didn't really see much of him play all season, so I'm just kind of going off what I've read from other people, but he really surged up the rankings on a lot of people's lists with his second half of this short season. So he's kind of a big-time draft season riser like Braden Tracy was last year from the Dub. Going to 18th overall, and Russian forward, left wing, right wing, Rodion Amirov from the MHL. 6'1", 167, so a little on the slight side. Saw him play in the Canada-Russia series. Didn't see anything there that really popped. Didn't get a chance to watch any MHL games online this season, and he didn't make the World Juniors. So my personal viewings of him are very limited, so I don't really have a lot of personal opinion about him, just going off some trusted people that have seen him play a lot more, and they say he's really smart. He's a speedy, skilled forward, but yeah, I think he needs to add some bulk to his frame in order to compete at the pro or NHL level. And you know, being Russian, it could be a few years before he's ready to cross the pond, so he's a long-term play. So that moves him. Those reasons move him down a little bit on my rankings if you see him higher on other people's. 19th rank, I go Caden Gooley, left shot defenseman from Prince Albert in the Dub. He's 6'2", 188. His older brother, I believe, is playing for the Ducks right now. And he is a big, mobile defenseman, great skating. He's offensive, but he kind of projects more as a 4-6 middle pairing complementary defenseman. Good size, big shot. Go on a little bit of a run on D here. Number 20, I go William Wallander, another left shot D, playing for Modo in the Super Elite League in Sweden. He's 6'4", 191, so he's a big, mobile defensive defenseman. Better in his own zone, but he does have some offensive upside. So if you're in a Roto league where defensemen get bonus points for hits and blocks and whatnot, that would give him some extra value. If not, if you're in a points-only league, maybe slide him down a little. 21, Jeremy Poirier, another defenseman, right shot D, St. John's, June 02, so a little bit on the younger side. He had 20 goals as a defenseman to lead all the D in scoring in the Q. Can't overlook that. 20 goals as a defenseman in any league is outstanding, and for fantasy hockey purposes, goals count in pretty much every league I've ever heard of. And get offense from your defense is a bonus. Next defenseman is 22nd overall, Emil Andre, Swedish left shot defenseman. Little on the undersized side, 5'9", 181, but he's a mobile two-way smart defenseman. Again, not someone who I've seen personally, but basically going off what Yoki tells me about him. Going back to forwards at 23rd overall, we've got Brandon Brisson, USHL center for Chicago. He's 5'11", 171, American-born. He's committed to play in the NCAA next year, of course, and he'll be going to the University of Michigan. So he's a couple seasons away from NHL as well. He was 2nd overall in USHL scoring, and I don't watch USHL games, so just trusting the opinion of people like Russ Cohen, who does watch a lot, and he's pretty high on him. So, and his opinion carries a lot of weight with me. 24th overall, JJ Peterka, playing for in the German DEL, 5'10", decent, actually a little on small size, but he's got some good speed, good hands. He's a strong forechecker despite being on the small size. Saw him play for Germany at the World Juniors and was really impressed. And he was able to produce some offense at the World Juniors as well, more than Reichel, who a lot of people have ranked higher than Peterka, but I like Peterka more than Reichel because of what I saw at the World Juniors. 25th overall, we've got center Maverick Bork from Shawinigan in the Q. He's also 5'10". He's a good two-way center. And he's got some great playmaking and passing abilities. Liked what I saw from him. 26 overall, Jan Mysak. He is a center from the Czech Republic. He came over after the World Juniors and played for Hamilton. And got to see him live. He's 5'11", 180, but he's got some silky smooth hands. Some very good moves. Scored some highlight reel goals. He's got a pretty decent shot. And the game I saw him, they were playing him on the point on the power play. I'm not sure how long that lasted, but that was like his first or second game in the OHL. Liked what I saw from him internationally as well. So pretty good upside there. Hendrix Laperriere, center for Chicoutimi, February 02. He's 6 foot 179. He's injured a lot this year, so he only played in 19 games, but he did post 17 points. I didn't get a chance to watch him. I didn't see any of his 19 games played. Obviously, he didn't make Team Canada or anything like that. But he uses potential. He might have some pretty good sleeper value because he'll be sliding down some people's lists because they didn't see him. But if you look at his career and how he did last year as a rookie in the Q, was very impressive. And I like what I read about him as well. So I think he's got the potential to be a really good sleeper pick or a later round value pick, especially if he falls down in the NHL draft ranking boards as well as a result of the injuries. All right, almost done here. 28th overall. I go back with one more defenseman on my list, and that will be Braden Schneider from the Brandon Wheat Kings in the Dub. He's 6'2", 202, so he's got some size. He's a good two-way defenseman with offensive upside. He's good in all situations. But pretty much would be a complimentary player, I would say. 29th overall, I go Zion Nybeck, the Swedish right winger playing in the Super Elite League. He's 5'7", 182, so a little bit on the small side. But he's a speedster. He's very elusive. He's got silky smooth hands as well, and he's got some creative upside. We all know that size doesn't really matter anymore in the NHL, so I think he's got a very good upside and value as well. 30th, I go Jacob Perreault, Sarnia Sting right winger, son of former NHLer Yannick Perreault. Yannick Perreault was really known for his face-off prowess, but Jacob is known more for his goal scoring. He's a shooter. He's got a great shot. He scored a lot on the power play for Sarnia. Unfortunately, when Sarnia came through Kingston, he was injured, and I didn't get to see him live. Yeah, still a very good player, highly ranked overall. 31st, Tyson Forrester from Barrie in the OHL. January 02, born 6'1", 194. He's a very good, skilled offensive winger as well. He had a really strong showing at the Top Prospects game. Playing for Barrie, they kind of finished last in the O, or second last, wherever it was. So when he got a chance to play with some elite players, he elevated his game. So that really kind of stood out to me, and I thought that was impressive. All right, so that's a wrap on my ranking of the 2020 NHL entry draft prospects. Now, that's enough for me. Let's move on and bring on our guest. He's actually an expert on this kind of stuff. That would be none other than the TSN Director of Scouting, Craig Button, as I mentioned off the top of the show. Craig was super, super gracious enough to come on the podcast, do an hour-long interview with me and I'm really excited about how it went. So without any further ado, let's go to the conversation I had with Craig Button. All right, so interview time on the podcast now, and I'm very happy to be joined for a third time, I believe, with Director of Scouting, Craig Button. Craig usually joins me from the draft floor, but since it doesn't look like there's going to be a draft, a live draft anyways this year, thanks very much for doing it the old-fashioned way and coming online with me, Craig. Welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I will tell you this. We can have our draft floor be whatever it is and wherever it may be. We have a virtual draft floor. So let's just treat it like we're on the draft floor.
Yeah, I hope so. But one of the things that I'm really disappointed about with this whole situation is some of the players that get drafted in the first round and have their moment on the stage and get up there and put on the jersey and the hat and the photo on stage and do the media gauntlet and talk to all the TV and radio and guys like me and you, and have that little 15 minutes of fame. For some of the players that get picked in the first round, that's it. That is their NHL experience. They go to some camps and maybe an exhibition game if they're lucky, but there's been a number of people drafted in the first round that have 0 NHL games played. So it's a little bit sad that there's a possibility that some of the players from this draft class might be denied that. And hopefully everyone that does get drafted in the first round just makes it to the NHL someday.
Yeah, I think that, when you're drafting somebody in the first round, every team has, the highest of hopes for the player they draft. But, yes, we're dealing with a scenario where, that, as you just pointed out about being at the draft, hockey's the only sport, professional sport, that has all their teams in the same place with all the players there. And it is pretty special, Peter. And, we get to see that and the enthusiasm, from the young players and their families and friends. It really is special. But what I will say is this may be a whole entirely new opportunity for NHL teams and the NHL and media to try to engage with these players in different ways and in ways that we would have never thought about if this didn't happen. So yes, you're right, putting on the jersey, but maybe we have to do it. Maybe we have to look at how we give the players a different experience and how we engage with them and try to convey their excitement about being drafted and realizing their goal. Because whether it be high school students graduating, college students graduating, we've seen it, with other sports where players, like, think of the NCAA, hockey and basketball. You think about, the CHL, players that, are not going to have an opportunity to try to finish the year and finish it with a championship, that they've sacrificed for. So, there's lots of it, and there's certain things we're not going to be able to make up for. And like I said, opportunity to, try to convey the excitement and present it in a different way. We may have never thought about it if this didn't happen, but I think these are things we got to consider and contemplate.
Well, I like the glass half full and make the best of every opportunity kind of mentality you have there, Craig. That's good stuff. Talking about players not making it out of the first round, I recently was on another podcast and we did a redraft of the 1997 draft, the top 15 players. And going back that far and doing some research on the draft, I was a little bit surprised at how many players were picked in the first round that never really had any sort of significant NHL career. And one of the questions the host said he wanted to talk about was, is this the best draft class within, 5 years forward or backwards? And I went through some of the other drafts and looked at that and noticed that there was a number of players that didn't make it into the NHL out of the first round of those drafts as well. That seems to be a little bit different now. It seems like more and more players that are picked in the first round are having NHL careers of some degree. What do you attribute that to? Do you attribute that to better development at the lower levels, maybe perhaps better scouting, or player development once they're drafted, or a little bit of all the above?
How about 4 new teams? 98, 99, 5 new teams. 98 Nashville, 99 Atlanta, which is now Winnipeg, Columbus, Minnesota in 2000, and now Vegas. 5 new teams create new opportunities too. Peter, you go back through the course of the draft and you look at drafts. And so however you want to do a cutoff, when you're drafting players and you look at players drafted in the first round, you're counting on them being important players for your team for not 1 year or 2 years, but for a number of years. And so if you look at players that have played 350 games or 400 games, which is, in that 4 to 5 year range of career, approximately 45 play that many games. So, and that doesn't, that's going to be expanded a little bit as you get more teams, but there's no question that scouting, the process and how you go about it, has improved. Because the resources are different and you have many more resources to be able to do it better. From video scouting, from the analytic point of view, more scouts, the world is more open now too. Our game really, when we start to think about an international game, it really is truly international. And it starts at a much younger age. The players are more familiar with one another. You have a background on the players, 15, 16 years of age, and not just from North America, but right around the world. So I think that as the knowledge on the players has increased and the processes, in terms of scouting have improved, and, technology and the tools at our disposal have become more numerous, I think that inevitably leads to better scouting, and I think that's clearly what's happened over the last number of years, and I think we can see clear evidence of that.
One of those tools that I think is heavily weighted on is the scouting combine, and we're not having that this year. What impact do you think that'll have, and how are teams compensating for that? Are they allowed to interview players, or can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, like the combine. So here's what I would say about the combine from a perspective, and so now we're into the physiology, right? So, you think about, testing players at a younger age and, having benchmarks for what players have and the strength and conditioning coach and the physiologist that examine the data. So what becomes really important for the NHL teams, Peter, is that, you're picking, let's just say 11. Right? So you're looking at a cluster of players that you're considering in 11. You're not looking at 20 players. You're looking at 4 or 5 players. And that's really all you're looking at. So now you go deeper into that player, into that group of players at that point. So let's say that the scouting staff likes this player. And they go and they say, well, we really like him. We know that his skating has to improve, but we think that it's really got the ability to improve once he gets stronger. Now the physiologist and the strength and conditioning coaches come over and go, well, wait a second here. Looking at his body composition and the testing that they do off of force plates and the different tests they use, they might say that player doesn't have as much room to improve as that player. Now you bring in your skating coach, and your skating coach comes in and says, well, that player's stride, that's kind of something that's really hard to change. So you factor in all these different elements to try to gain the most confidence with a player that you're going to select, and then you order them from there. The thing about the combine and the testing is that, that becomes really important in building that confidence. every NHL team is not going to have that. Now, I don't know if there's going to be a combine. Nobody does know that, but make no mistake about it. It has become a significant part of the evaluation towards that significant confidence level of saying, this is our guy and this, or our guys, and this is the order we like them in, because you're taking in all the information from many different areas.
What about the interview process of the combine? Is that's something that would be possible to facilitate still remotely? I mean, we're using Skype right now. You're in Calgary, I'm in Kingston, and we're having an interview. It'd be very possible for the teams to do that. They have to have league permission, I believe, to have those conversations, though. Is that something you would see happening?
I know some players have had interviews with players. I don't think you're not allowed to test players, but I think interviews are ongoing. Now, I will tell you this about the combine. You know, all those kids are there at the combine. It's a great opportunity for the teams and the players to meet one another. It's 15-minute lunch. That's what it is. If you think you're culling any significant information from those 15-minute interviews, you are completely kidding yourself. You are not. Again, it does give teams an opportunity face-to-face. It might give a team an opportunity to ask a player about a specific scenario or situation surrounding them, a question they might want answered. And it gives players an opportunity to answer, a different question. But much like I talk about those clusters, the in-depth interviews are going to take place with that 4 or 5 player group that you're considering at pick 11, at any other pick. That's where you go in depth. That's where every team now, how much you can go in depth, what it means on a Skype or a FaceTime or a Zoom interview, all dependent on what you're trying to get out of it and what you feel is beneficial in terms of the interview process. But the combine is nice. You get to, like I said, put a name to a face, but it's the in-depth part that's not going to be, and the person to person. Now, you can go in depth on Skype or any of the other video platforms, but it's different. But it doesn't mean it can't be meaningful. But that's where it goes. But the testing part is the one that's going to be significant if they can't do that. I will tell you this about all the players. 75, 80 of them going around the clock, going around in Buffalo. They're going to be happy that they don't have to go and do that, because like Alexis Lafreniere, really he's got to go meet with the team picking 8th? No.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the draft and some rankings. In the segment just before this interview, I went over my 31, and you posted your most recent Craigslist recently up on TSN. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the players and where they are on your list. I noticed it going through.
Can I just ask one question, Peter?
Yeah.
I am going to ask you about 3 players, okay, at the conclusion of this, okay? Just so, because I want to get your insight on these 3 players.
All right. Okay, so I noticed that going through a lot of other people's lists as well, that the top 3 is almost always, but not entirely, Lafreniere, Byfield, and Stützle. And you're consistent with that. You had Lafreniere at number 1 overall. I think that's a pretty, a general consensus opinion. The Dobber Prospects managing editor, Cam Robinson, his list had Byfield at number 1, and his argument to that was, while he admits that Lafreniere had a better season this year and is a better player now, his gut tells him that Byfield could have the better long-term career and NHL success. I'm really curious to hear what your thought is on that, because I know when you do your draft rankings, it's not who's the best players today. It's you're projecting 3 to 5 years down the road. And you had Byfield at 3rd on your list. So I'm really curious to hear what you have to think about those 2 players in comparison to each other.
Well, again, really good points, and certainly ones I don't disagree with. I mean, if somebody says that Quinton Byfield's the best player in this draft, I mean, I can make a case for Alexis Lafreniere, but I mean, that's not one that you're going, really? Okay, that's a head scratcher. When I did my list, when we put out the list last week, you know, we did a video part of it, and I was asked, out of all these players, who could end up, because we look back at a draft and we go, who could end up being the best player if we look back in 3 to 5 years' time? And I did say Quinton Byfield, because I think Quinton Byfield has tremendous potential. Two things about Quinton that I feel. Number one, I really still feel that he's still finding out and figuring out how good a player he can be. We know the skill. I know his determination. I know how really, you know, how good he wants to be in all the areas of the game. But I think he's still figuring out how good he can be. And I think that's significant. And, you know, when I say that, I need to expound on that. And what I mean by that is he's 6'4", and he's got this power and this skill set that, to me, once he understands how impactful he can be and how much he can impose himself on opponents and be that difficult to handle, I mean, he could be one of those players that's, you know, really, really impactful. So that's part of development. That's part of projection, and it's certainly part of potential. The other thing about Quinton as well, and I think this is really significant, I think whoever drafts him in the draft, I think it'll be a huge mistake to put him in the NHL next year. Huge. And I'll tell you why. He has never dominated his age level once he turned junior. Not at the U17, not at the Hlinka tournament, and he should have never been on the World Junior team. He wasn't ready for that level of competition. And I think for him to gain that confidence to be an imposing figure with the skill and the determination he has is that another year at junior, dominating, putting up big points, going to the World Junior Championship and being a really key figure on that team. I think that that's what will allow him to do that. Now, there's a learning curve in there, and there's also the part about, you know, teams, quite frankly, make mistakes in their development with players. You know, I say this all the time. Players are failed as much as they fail on their own. And so you better be careful. In my view, you better be careful with Quinton and look at the historical record. Now, when it comes to Alexis Lafreniere, from day one in the Quebec League, he has done nothing but perform. The first 16-year-old since Sidney Crosby to score 40 goals or more. Goes to the U18 that year as a 16-year-old, leads Canada in scoring, a force. Hlinka, best on best, MVP, leads his team to gold, best player there. He goes, he's the CHL Player of the Year, coming back to the Quebec League. Goes to the World Junior Tournament, MVP, we know what he did there, and, you know, the CHL Player of the Year again, I mean, I don't see how he's not gonna be, he'll be the second player after Crosby to win that award 2 times. Alexis Lafreniere can do it all. There's nothing he can't do in the game. I know that there's a year difference, just about in terms of their age, and that factors in. I really don't care about age. I care about how they're projected and how they're progressing and what I see as in the NHL. And I see Lafreniere as a star. And, you know, I've used this example. We drafted Jarome Iginla in 1995 in Dallas, and we thought he was going to be a really good player, a power forward, kind of a Gary Roberts, John McLean type player. That's what we thought he would be. Well, I'll tell you what, we knew he was a really good player. He not only became a star, he became a superstar. And so when I say Lafreniere can be as a star, I have no doubt he might end up being a superstar. And Byfield, I've done a range of type of player. I think at the very least, he'll be Sean Couturier. And could he be Anze Kopitar, Evgeny Malkin, depending on which way he goes with his development and where he weights his game? All I know is that those are 3 pretty good players, and that speaks to a pretty high-quality player.
That is outstanding. This is why I love having you on the podcast, because you and I seem to think very similar in a lot of ways. And you saw
people might penalize you for that, Peter. They'll say, don't start thinking like Craig.
You do take a lot of heat on Twitter, I must say, and it makes me scratch my head that all these Twitter hockey experts think they know more than a guy with a Stanley Cup ring and the resume that you support. Anyhow, you did steal my question, though, about how they're a year apart in age, and I think that has a lot to do with the sort of way that we see them ranked and the seasons that they had, and gave Lafreniere an advantage both during the regular season and at the World Juniors. I just think he's almost an entirely year ahead on his development. And this time next year, hopefully, I agree with you. I think Byfield should go back to junior and play another season with Sudbury. And I think you'll see a totally different guy at the World Juniors. I think he has the potential to dominate for Canada the way Lafreniere did this year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And you could even go back to last year and say, okay, look at what happened with Alexei in Vancouver. But Quentin didn't do what Alexei did at 16. And Quentin didn't do what Alexei did at 17. In fact, he really didn't come close. So keep that in mind. So if we want to go year to year, and I know that he's got an extra year on him, we're talking about the CHL Player of the Year. Quentin Byfield's not close to the CHL Player of the Year.
Right. Another thing that you mentioned that really resonated with me is that he should not play in the NHL next year. So let's explore the possibility that he ends up going first overall. Right? Let's say Cam Robinson gets promoted to the GM of whoever wins the lottery and gets first pick overall, and he picks Byfield. There seems to be this unwritten rule that players picked first overall in the NHL entry draft have to graduate to the NHL. I can't remember the last player that was picked first overall that didn't. And there's been a number of players, to your point, that shouldn't have. And it perhaps tainted their development and their career. Looking at you, Nail Yakupov. Do you think there's a chance that in the future a player will get picked first overall and not go into the NHL right away and go back to junior or wherever he came from?
Well, we're in a similar, I'm not going to say similar, but we could end up in a similar situation with certainly a delayed draft, not understanding, what happens with the 2019-2020 season and the beginning of the 2020-2021 season. Alexander Ovechkin went first overall in 2004, never had a chance because it was a lockout season, right? So there's a first overall pick. Now I was in Minnesota. I had just started in Minnesota when Mike Modano was drafted. He went back to junior. And I'll be honest with you. I see Quentin a lot of in the same light as Mike. Terrific talents, terrific potential, but that ability to go and continue that growth and that progress, I think is significant for a young player. I saw how much it helped Mike, and Mike was the first. Mike was the first guy to go back to junior that was a first overall pick. And, you look at Ovechkin. So I don't think it's about the first overall pick. A lot of times the first overall, well, not a lot of times, the vast majority of times, a first overall pick is ready to move in. But Joe Thornton, he played his first year in the NHL. Would have he potentially benefited by going back to junior? Perhaps, but it didn't hurt him. And I'm not saying that it would potentially hurt Quentin Byfield. What I'm saying is what I think would be best for him. And not just best in terms of watching him play, but knowing him. And I think Quentin is a player that comes in with he's confident in his game, but it's kind of like he needs to wade in a little bit and wade in. And then once he gets comfortable, watch out. But if you don't get the chance to get comfortable and you get in over your head, yeah, you know what? You might be able to overcome it like Joe Thornton did. But Joe Thornton was a dominant 17-year-old. And Quentin was pretty dominant this year too in Sudbury, so I don't want to take that away from him despite him missing some games. But again, it doesn't mean that it will hinder him, but looking forward in that regard, I think you have to look at the individual player, and it's for that reason that I say going back to junior for another year, I think could benefit not only him tremendously, but the team that drafts him.
Right. So let's follow that up with a two-part question. One, do you think Alexis Lafreniere is NHL ready now and should play in the NHL next year? And what other players in the draft do you think are the closest to being NHL ready right away?
Well, I think Alexis Lafreniere is clearly ready. I think he's ready from a playing standpoint, skill standpoint, and maturity standpoint. And I don't think he's just like, and I distinguish, Peter, between playing and contributing. A lot of players can play in the league. Jack Hughes played in the league this year. Kaapo Kakko played in the league this year. Kirby Dach played in the league this year. And you cannot say that any one of those players to any extent were contributing players. It was a developmental year for them. Now, Kirby Dach got a little bit better in the new year and got some more opportunities, but it was developmental years for them. I don't look at the NHL as a developmental league, quite frankly. So, Alexis Lafreniere, I think he's got the ability to come in and get 60 plus points. And I think he's got a chance to come in and be a contributor right from the get-go because he's that good and he's that mature and he's ready to handle the rigors and the demands of the National Hockey League on a game-in, game-out basis. It's not that Jack Hughes, Kaapo Kakko, and Kirby Dach aren't going to be good players. And it doesn't mean they don't have good skill, but they're not ready. They weren't ready to contribute at the NHL level to any great extent, to any really even partially good extent. That's just where they found themselves in their development period and where they find themselves. But I think Alexis clearly has that. And as I pointed out, I mean, he's dominated. He's been a dominant player. I mean, I always tell young players, dominate the level you've been at, dominate it, own your age group, and then move on. And I think Alexis clearly done that. Now, to answer your question, I think the only other player that could come in and be a contributor is Marco Rossi. Again, he's mature. He's got the physical maturity. He's got the skill. He's another late birthday. So I think that he could come in and contribute. The other two players that I think could come in and contribute probably at a lesser level, but I think they would clearly benefit from another year outside the NHL are Stützle and Anton Lundell. But when I look at Lundell, I know he's smart. I know he's competitive. I know that he knows how to play the game. But I want to see him try to develop more offense. And if you get into the NHL and you're trying to hang on, you miss a year. And Stützle, I mean, the German league's a hard league and it's a demanding league. But again, another year, I just don't think would hurt him. Because for the most part, these players aren't going to good teams. They're going to teams that are going to struggle, and it's hard to get your footing and to gain that confidence by being productive when you're in those situations.
Right. One of the reasons, I suppose, why some players go to the NHL as a development year as opposed to the AHL is the way the CBA works out between the NHL and CHL. They don't have the opportunity to graduate to the AHL. So they're kind of a tweener. Do they go back and have another year? Like, say if they dominated already in their draft year in the CHL, they can't go to the A, unless, there's a loophole there where they're on loan from a European club. But generally speaking, it's one or the other. It's back to junior or to the NHL. Do you think that's got a lot to do with where some of these players spend their developmental year in the NHL as opposed to anywhere else?
I mean, each team's going to evaluate. I mean, a lot of teams want to have control over it. I don't see the NHL as a developmental league.
Right.
So clearly, I think it's a mistake. If you're not ready to go and play in that league and you haven't dominated and you have to have dominated and you have to be ready. And so again, I've watched Jack Hughes dominate. I think he's going to be a star in the NHL. I wish there was a league he could have played in outside the NHL this year that would allow that physical maturity to come to play, and he could still be highly productive. And I mentioned about Modano. Modano he ended up breaking his wrist after he got sent back to junior in an all-star game. But you go back, I think he had 109 points in 40 games. So when he came into the National Hockey League the next year, it wasn't as the first overall pick. It was as the first overall pick and a dominant player. And I think that becomes significant for players because you want to put players in the NHL and develop them. More mistakes are going to happen and you're going to have more problems in the development process. And teams want to sit down and go, we want to control our players. I'll also say this. I think the American Hockey League in a lot of instances is harder than the National Hockey League for the top end players. There's less skill down there, and there's tiers of players, younger players that have come in trying to find the way, middle range players that are fighting to get their opportunity in the NHL, and then the older players that are, they're good players and they're trying to figure out, am I going to Europe or am I staying here? And they're really counted upon to play those top minutes. And so do you get those opportunities? Because, at the minor league level, you got different objectives in terms of trying to win. So I think that becomes a real challenge for younger players to play in that league as well.
Interesting. A moment ago, you mentioned one of the other players who could play in the NHL right now would be Marco Rossi. Rossi and Quinn both played for the Ottawa 67s this year. Marco Rossi led the CHL in scoring, but you had Jack Quinn a little bit higher on your list. Talk to me about that.
If somebody told me Marco Rossi should be ahead of Jack Quinn, I couldn't quibble about that. I'll tell you what it straight came down to. Jack to me is an elite goal scorer, and he's not just a one-trick goal scorer. He scores all manner of ways, and he's a good, solid two-way player. He kills penalties, and he wasn't reliant. I mean, he didn't rely on others to drive his game. He drove his own game, and I see him as the best goal scorer in this draft. I see him as a potential 50 goal scorer in the NHL. I see him like David Pastrnak. Now, I go to Marco Rossi, who's a center, and I see him like Nick Backstrom, a very, very top-end playmaker, very creative offensively, understands how you want to create offense, where to create it, how to get the puck into the right hands, and he knows how to take advantage. So to me, quite frankly, I went with David Pastrnak type with the 50 goals over the playmaker. But if you want a center that's a top-end playmaker, then you take Rossi over Quinn. If you want the guy that can score goals, and if you look at New Jersey, and I look at New Jersey, let's just say New Jersey's debating between the two. I'm taking Quinn because Quinn's a goal scorer, and I got Hughes and I got Hischier. I'm not taking Marco Rossi because I don't need a center there. I need somebody that can play off those guys and give them support. So I think it all comes down. They're in the same cluster. One over the other, to me, you weigh what each of them brings and what would be best for your team, and then go from there.
Really, how much emphasis do you think teams picking in the first round or the top half of the first round? How much emphasis do they put on organizational need, or is that a potential trump when it comes to between this guy or that guy, or is it always just best player available and we'll do asset management after that?
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you really think, and I'm asking this in a serious way, and I'll answer my question and let you answer.
No.
If you think that I'm smart enough to tell you that the second guy's better than the third guy and the fourth guy's better than the fifth guy, I have no ability to do that. I think too many people and NHL teams spend too much time trying to do that with the so-called best player available. I don't know if Jack Quinn's better than Marco Rossi. I don't know if Marco Rossi's better than Jack Quinn. I think they're both top-end players. I think you have to evaluate the players. Okay, here's what this player brings. Here's what this player brings. And you better have them in the right cluster. I'm not trying to compare somebody down the list with these guys. My main goal is to have them in the right cluster. Then we can debate if the guy should be 9 or 6 or 4 or 3 or 7. I have no problem with that debate back and forth. But you got to know what the players bring. And absolutely, you better, as an NHL team, be looking at what players bring to your team and what you may need. Because when you have a Jack Hughes, and you saw what he did with Cole Caulfield for 2 years, well, I want guys that can put the puck in the net playing beside him. I don't need another center. So you have to look at your prospect pool. You have to look at what's in your cupboard. You have to understand what's coming because you're trying to build a team. And so, the Edmonton Oilers all those years, all they did was take this player, and they went nowhere because they didn't build a team. So you have to understand how you're doing it. I'm not saying to be reckless and to take it from one era to another, but within that group, you look at it and you try to look, okay, what does this player have and what does this? I believe too many times, too often, people are trying, well, 6 is better than 7. Okay. Like, if you want to tell me 6 is better, or 7 is better than 6, I probably won't have an argument. But you understand what each of them bring. I think that's the key. And
right. Okay. So I guess the flaw in my, sorry?
And just, this is the guy we're taking and we're going to celebrate it. We're happy.
So I guess the flaw in my statement was pick the best player available and then let asset management take over. You're saying the pick that you're making is asset management. The asset management starts with the pick.
Totally agree. Peter,
right.
I'm going to steal that commentary now. I will give you attribution. I haven't heard it said any better.
Wow. Well, thanks for that. Okay, so let's move down your list a tad. Another player that I really wanted to ask you about because I just really haven't had a chance to see him play, and you have him ranked really high, is Hendrix Lapierre. 19 games played, missed a whole bunch because of concussion, scored a lot in the 19 games that he played, and his rookie season in the Q was good, but I'm just looking at his stats on Elite Prospects. You've watched this guy play. Why are you so in love with him? Sell me on him.
Well, I've watched Hendrix play since he was in midget, and
right.
He to me, he's an elite player. He's got an elite mind. He's got elite skills, and as I've continuously watched him over the years, all I've seen is him, be better and better and better. And I'll go right to the Hlinka Gretzky tournament last summer. Him, Cole Perfetti, and Askarov were the best players in that age group. And there was nobody, Drysdale was right there coming up behind. Lapierre dominated. Okay. So when I'm looking at this player, I'm looking at the game that he has. He's got a brilliant mind. The guy can play anywhere in the rink. In fact, there's not a square inch of the ice that he cannot play in and be a really key player in all those areas of the game. His game reminds me of Patrice Bergeron. So I know that he had a concussion, and he's got the playmaking skills. He's got the competitive will. He's got the ability to create offense. He's got the ability to take away opportunities from opponents defensively. So I see him as a supreme two-way player. Now, I'm looking at potential. The medical report will be a real key part for NHL teams to have that confidence that he's a player that they want to select. And, Hendrix was very close, was right nearing coming back to play. And he was excited about it. And I think he was and really enthusiastic to show what he's capable of. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to try to be a doctor. I look at the potential, and I see a player that's top end. And if the medical report checks out and, you move forward with him, I don't have any doubt that he can be a top player from this year's draft.
Nice. Another player you just mentioned right there, let's talk about him, is the Russian goalie, Askarov. Seen him play a couple times in international tournaments, and I really, really like what I see. He's somewhat a little bit in the World Juniors, but I don't care about that. Hey, he's great. He's a good goalie. But something I've noticed lately is, and this is very obvious observation, is that goalies don't get a lot of love in the first round of the draft. Yeah, Spencer Knight go last year, but a lot of people think you shouldn't draft goalies very early. And you and I both have Askarov high in our lists. How much faith do you put in not drafting goalies early? Is that just nonsense to you, or what?
Well, I think you have to look at it with respect to, okay, who are you comparing them to? So what skaters are you comparing them to, forward or defense? Number one. So again, you try to get them in that right cluster, and you say, okay, how does his potential relate to the skater's potential? And then you can go from there. I don't think you just take the player away and say he's a goalie and it takes him longer. Like, it takes some players, skaters, longer to be able to find their place, their footing in the National Hockey League. So, what's different than that projection as opposed to a goalie projection? And I think you weigh those all together. But let me I know there's been some, but, there's been defensemen that have been drafted high that haven't made it. There's been forwards that have been drafted high that haven't made it. But here's what I'm going to go through. Marc-Andre Fleury went first overall. Is that a problem?
Nope.
Was Carey Price a problem?
No.
Was Tuukka Rask a problem?
No.
Was Andre Vasilevsky a problem?
Yeah, right?
And I'll give you, and so Devin Dubnyk went in the first round, and it took him a little bit of time, right? Like it did. And we really found, he was finding his game in Edmonton, and then that whole year kind of blew up for everybody. And then he kind of had to go and reset, and then he's come back and been really good. And I know there's examples of other first round goaltenders that haven't made it. I get it. But I think you've got to evaluate them vis-a-vis, okay, their skills, their abilities, their potential. Samsonov. I think Samsonov was a great pick because Washington said, we're going to take this guy right here. We have Braden Holtby. We're not going to be looking at Samsonov for another 4 years or so, which is basically what it came out to. And then now you put him in the incubator and let him grow and outside. So you can also look at it that way. I think if you're looking at a goaltender to come in and immediately play, I think you're asking for problems. Okay, because I just as I mentioned earlier about other players, I think it becomes really difficult to put players in the NHL that need development time, even harder for a goaltender. So again, but I'm not worried about getting a player there a year sooner that isn't going to be as good as the goaltender. I'm going to take the guy that I think can make a bigger impact and has a greater potential. So that's how I feel about the whole goaltending argument. But I don't think I don't think you should ignore it. And I don't think that you should, just ignore the fact that they take a little bit more development time and understand that. But I don't think you should ignore them just because they're goalies and they might take it. The whole idea is to get good goaltenders and get good defensemen and get good forwards at the different positions.
Right. What is that saying? Goaltending is 50% of everything, or if you have it, and it's everything if you don't have it, or something to that effect?
It really is. I know. You ask coaches and, looking for goaltenders. And again, so what's the difference between Henrik Zetterberg developing or Pavel Datsyuk developing late or a Braden Holtby developing late, right? Players of all different sizes, shapes, and spots in the draft develop. Some do and some don't. But when you're evaluating them, you have to be able to put everything into context. And I think you have to compare them. Then you sit down, okay, here's our pick. Do we want a goalie here? And is this it? Is he? But yeah, that's where we take him. And you know what? Again, I wish it was perfect, but I think it's too easy to just dismiss it as saying they need some development time, and therefore you shouldn't take them in the first round, because there's lots of examples of goaltenders that have been top-end goalies in the National Hockey League that were drafted in the first round. And the other thing I love that you said earlier, Yaroslav Askarov, he wasn't comfortable at the World Junior Tournament. The game was fast. It was steps up, and you could see that he wasn't comfortable. But if you're going to go and evaluate one stretch of one tournament and not understand where he's at, and further not understand where he's come from, I think that's where big mistakes get made. So I'm not saying you don't look at something and you don't say, hey, listen, here's what we saw. But and you've watched Askarov, I've watched Askarov for a long time. He's the best goaltending prospect I've seen enter the draft since Carey Price.
Yeah, he's not the same person that was in the Hlinka or the U17s that was just a dominant goalie and was just unstoppable. I mean, you just couldn't score on him. And then something happened at the World Juniors. He was a little bit nervous, or I don't know what it was, but like you said, it was just 2 games really that he played. That's not going to define his promise as a prospect for me anyways, and it shouldn't for anyone who knows what they're doing.
Well, I think so. And Peter, I will also add this. If you go back and you watch the 2005 Under-18 Championship, Carey Price was the Canadian goalie. Okay, he had a save percentage under 900. He wasn't very good. And if you wanted to go to that tournament and say, oh, Carey Price isn't that good, go ahead. Montreal Canadiens said, we're taking him, because they had a real depth of knowledge on the player, and they had a real strength of conviction in the determination of their evaluation. And again, you can look at players and you can say they didn't play good. If that's how you're going to evaluate players' potential based on if they played good or they played bad, all you're doing is setting the foundation for mistakes.
Right. And regret in the future.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I a lot of we look at drafts, Peter, and we look at teams and say, okay, they do a good job. But what nobody ever gets a chance to do is look at teams' lists and say, okay, we look and say they drafted this player. Oh, that's a great pick. But we don't know how they had players rated in and around that, right? That player might have come up and just, oh, geez, that worked out really good, right? And conversely, you might have a list that was flawed before your pick. And okay, it came to your pick and you got a good player. It doesn't mean that your scouting was in good order, because you might have flaws, but you didn't have to wear that mistake. And to me, scouting is not static for many reasons, but one of the big reasons is for NHL teams and for scouts, individual scouts, is to continuously evaluate, how did I evaluate that player? Where was I right? Where was I wrong? And guess what? You only get one pick in the first round. I mean, if everything goes in order, second round, right? But it's all those other players that you have to evaluate that you learn from. And it's always easier to go through that evaluation process when you don't have to wear the mistake.
Yep. Okay, so I'm running the clock here. I asked you a lot of draft questions. I can't let you go without asking at least one sort of scouting and fantasy hockey question. Yeah. So something you can maybe help me out with, and anyone else who follows hockey like I do with fantasy hockey and prospects, I've noticed that there's some CHL players that are in their overage season that have monster years, right? 100 plus points or whatever as a 20-year-old or what have you, playing in the dub or the O or the Q. Some of those players are undrafted and they get signed as free agents and they go on to have an NHL career or a very good career. Some of them don't. What are some tells that we can, as the untrained eye watching these players, what are some things that could be indicative of which trend they're going to follow? They're going to make it and be NHLers or fantasy relevant, or career minor leaguers or off to Europe or college or something?
Well, a couple of things that I would say on that, Peter, is number one, as players get older, and they gain confidence and maturity, they should be able to produce more if they have some ability. And, I say this all the time, but, signing college free agents, junior free agents, European free agents, zero downside for NHL teams. They're a little bit older. You know what? In some of those cases, the entry level contract doesn't have to be as long. So you're looking at that and saying, okay, we're going to take a chance because, 7 rounds in a draft, you only have so many players. Now, putting that aside, there's 2 things that I would look at with these players. Number one is this a player, number one, that's been able to mature, that's gained, he wasn't big enough or strong enough. He needed more time to physically mature, to find the way. And you go back in time and you say, okay, he produced here, he struggled as he did, but he got a little bit stronger and he was projecting up. I think those are important areas to evaluate. What I would be really careful with is the player that was already physically mature that has this huge spike because he's older. And maybe not a huge spike, but for an example, you go from 70 points, now you're a 20-year-old, and boom, you go to 100. That's almost a 50%, increase. So, is that based on him becoming older and just a little bit more savvy and he can take advantage of it? Because remember now, you're going back to the NHL, and where was that player, because he's now going to be at the bottom of the totem pole again. And so is he going to be able to rise up? And maybe he can, but the trick for me, not trick, that's the wrong way to put it, but the area that you look at is that entry level contract is 3 years. If it took that player 4 years to get to that point, he's only got a 3-year entry-level contract. Where is he going to be at the end of the 3 years? And I think that, if there's been something that's just kind of, okay, he got stronger, he needed a little bit more time, those types of things, I think they become something that's significant. For an example, and I'm just going to use him, Alex Iafallo. You watch him in June, you watch him in college, and he can skate. He got bigger and stronger, more powerful, and you could say, geez, he looks like a player that's going to really move forward here. LA signs him. Took him a little bit of time, but much like he did in college, same trajectory, and he's there. It wasn't like this player that all of a sudden in his senior year at college or his overage year in junior, all of a sudden rose up. I think it's great for players to do that, but you want to see how they progressed through their timelines to understand, how much of a tell that season is. Because I think you can get those big spikes, but it might not be indicative.
Right. Just because a player wasn't drafted when they were 17 or 18 years old doesn't mean anything, because there's been a lot of players that were never NHL drafted that went on to have Hall of Fame careers.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, people say, they missed them. I can tell you, and Peter, you're out there doing the work. I can tell you this. If a player goes through a draft, 31 teams didn't miss them. Maybe 30 missed them, but all 31 didn't miss them. It doesn't work that way. It means that the player did not show enough or wasn't capable of showing enough of his abilities. And that might be, again, just physical maturity, wasn't ready to do it. And then we see that as they get a little bit more confident, a little bit more mature, that they're able to show what they're capable of. And I think that that's a big key to keep in mind. And, again, I think what's a really good indicator with free agents is where have they been before? Where have they been before and how have they progressed up? And you look at it and then you try to make your assessment. Still inexact, still not perfect, but certainly something that I try to look at. And I think that there's opportunity to evaluate that in different areas.
Right on. All right. I'm a little bit nervous, but go ahead and hit me with your 3 players you want to hear from me about.
Okay, Martin Chromiak, who I watched for a number of years with Slovakia, and he jumps over to Kingston this year. I thought he was always a player that internationally, I always liked him. I liked the way he skated. I liked the way he competed. But it seemed that he really took off once he got to Kingston.
Well, playing with Shane Wright, it's not going to hurt anyone's game. Martin Chromiak, he fit right in. He didn't have that long adjustment period. I liked the first game he saw. The first thing that stood out to me after game 1 was his kid can shoot. He's a good shot. And then as he grew more into his role, I started to notice his smarts and his vision and his hockey sense a lot more, and that he's very good at finding open ice, anticipating plays, intercepting passes, and anticipating where his line mates as he started to develop chemistry with them. That's something that stood out to me that grew. He and Wright and Wisdom were oftentimes a dominant line in games. So I like him. I think he's a legit prospect.
Well, it's interesting when we know how good Shane is, right? And I mean what he did this year, but certainly you get an opportunity to play with Shane, but you also, I guess what I would say is when you talk about how we fit in, it's not easy to play with top end players. It sounds to me, when I watched, you saw him a lot more than I did there. Chromiak really fit in nicely with Shane Wright.
Yeah. Yeah, now, that line had excellent chemistry, and like I said, they were often dominant. Well,
so now my favorite name in the draft this year, and I got 2 favorite names. I got the Gunnar Wolf from Chicago Steel, Gunnar Wolf Fontaine. Love the name, but my tie is Zadie Wisdom. Now, The first time I saw him play, it was like, I saw him last year, but the first time you see him, you're like, whoa, is he taking a step ahead? And again, we talk about assertiveness and confidence and everything. So, thoughts on Zadie Wisdom?
I am a huge Zade Wisdom fan, and I think you could nickname him Charlie Hustle. So last year was his first year in the O, and he was like a dog after a bone. He was all over the ice. His compete level was the highest game in and game out. But there's a lot of other elements of his game that made him look like a rookie, like a 16-year-old in the OHL. Uh-huh. And this year he's made significant significant improvement this year. His confidence with the puck is night and day. You know, like it's not a hot potato anymore. Last year it was, that's my puck, don't you dare touch it. But as soon as he got it, he didn't know what to do with it or look to pass it to another teammate. This year, he'll take the puck and he'll hold it and he'll, circle the wagons in the offensive zone until he sees something that he likes. He'll work the cycle. He's just got so much more confidence. And his puck control ability has significantly improved. In particular, his pass reception. His first year, he kind of struggled taking some passes that bounce off his stick or a few feet off his stick in front of him, and then he'd lose possession. This year, you couldn't give him a bad pass. Behind him, he just put his stick back between his legs and tap it up to his forehand and all in stride and keep on going. A lot of people might think that he's just riding on the coattails of playing on a line with Shane Wright and Martin Chromiak, but I think that is a fallacy in assumption. He made so much progress this year, and it's not because he's playing on a line with Shane Wright this year. Of course, that didn't hurt, right? Obviously. But I'm a big fan of this kid, and I'm really anxious to see if he can continue to develop like he did last year. He's going to be a dominant player next year.
Well, I mean, I think watching him, he just became so much more sure of himself. Like,
right?
You talked about the, how he just seemed to be able to, okay, I just got to get the puck away from me. He didn't seem to have that confidence level, but it just seemed to me that he went to a whole different level with respect to, his understanding that he can do a lot more than just kind of be a player that kind of just fits in.
Yep. And his hockey smarts, evolved a lot. Since he came into the league too. I mean, he was always an aggressive forechecker, but he's much more smart about it now. And he understands, the passing lanes and the flow of the game a lot more than he did as a rookie. And he creates so many turnovers and interceptions and creates chances for him and his line mates that way. And he's so good defensively that way too. I mean, the coach can't play him enough.
Isn't that the greatest compliment?
Yeah.
It really is it? Yeah. I always say this, Peter, watch how the coaches use players. They're giving you a really good indication about what they feel about that player. They're really, you can ask coaches, but watch how they use them. I think that gives you a really good sense of how much confidence they have in them. So the last guy I'm going to ask you about is Jacob Murray. And again, I've watched him since he was in midget. I thought he was very close to making the Hlinka team. I thought he had played well enough to be right in the mix for it. Where are you at because I've seen him be really good and I've seen him be unsure of himself. I've seen him, at times, be assertive, at other times hesitate. What are your thoughts on him?
So when I'm watching players, and I don't like to use the term scouting because I'm not scouting for anybody other than my own fantasy hockey team and podcast. But when I'm watching players and assessing them, what I'm looking for primarily, my agenda is fantasy hockey related. And,
okay.
And Murray's, it's not really resonating that way, right? Like, so this could sound like an insult, but it's really not. When you go to a Frontenacs game, you might not notice him. He just doesn't stand out, right? Yep. He's not a flashy player, but he's a defenseman. And that's great for a defenseman. That means he's not getting beat. He's not creating turnovers. He's not making blind passes through the neutral zone that are getting intercepted and banged in the back of his own net. For a defenseman to be invisible is a compliment. Now, if he's an offensive defenseman and you say he's invisible, I can't even notice him, then that's not good. Right. But offense isn't his forte. If he makes it to the pro level of the NHL, it's not going to be on the power play.
Yeah, he's going to be that defensive type defenseman, move the puck effectively, and like you said, not be noticed. Just having watched him for so long and seeing those, like I said, I've seen everything you've seen, but you try to get a little bit greater sense of what a player may be. And so I think you haven't given me any reason to think that he's better than what he's shown or that he's worse than what he's shown.
Right.
Well, there you go. Nothing to be nervous about.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, but I did because, the people that watch players on a regular basis, get a really good sense of those players. And the way you talk about Chromiak and the way you talk about, Zaid Wisdom, it just gives, in the times I've seen those players play, and, it just gives you, okay, others are seeing that, okay, it reinforces, or somebody saw that, did I see that? And always gives me that opportunity to reflect and continue the evaluation.
Yeah, man, it's a big world, and you can't watch Kingston Frontenacs play 20 games a season. There's just not enough hours in the day for you to watch all the teams play that many. If you see them play once or twice a year, I think you're probably doing well.
Yeah.
And so, you like me and everyone else, you have to rely on the opinions of other people who you respect that watch those players play a lot more often than you do.
Yeah. You got to take in all the information.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't beat the eye test, right?
Well, you know what? I like the eye test is good, but I go back and look at video. You look at the analytics part of it, and but what I'm always trying to work towards is that, like, is this in symmetry? Because if you go back and you watch a game, a lot of times I go and watch a game live, and then I want to go back and watch the video for certain areas. Did I see what I thought I saw? And that becomes confirmation. You go, okay, I didn't see that, or that's not exactly what I thought happened. And same thing with the analytics. You look at the numbers and you go, okay, that lines up with where I'm at, or whoa, I better go back the next time and watch for some of these things. Maybe he gives away the puck more than I realized, right? And so you're always trying to balance those out. And like I said, get it streamlined in your evaluation so that when you arrive at those points, when you're coming to what I call the data points of evaluation, you say, okay, here's where it's at. Here are my concerns. Here are where I'm satisfied, and you move on from there.
Yep. It's just a piece of the puzzle, but it's a big one.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So how you doing with the whole quarantine thing? You keeping yourself sane? You watching a lot of tape, or?
Yeah,
I think, putting your feet up?
No, there's no putting my feet up. There's, like I said to you, if this happened in August or September, it would be an entirely different scenario for us. We wouldn't have as much material to work with. So yeah, looking at, lots of different, video and, going back over notes, and, really what it's become is an opportunity to delve, a little bit deeper, a little bit wider, and even into some players that you haven't watched as much, that you can delve in a little bit deeper in on. And, just organize things. I think this has given all of us an opportunity to really organize things in how we are, in our work that we've done and how we work going forward.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just leave it at this and say I hope that the NHL is able to put together a live draft again this year, and at which point I'll be able to say hi and shake your hand and thank you for coming on this podcast. But if it's not this summer, then I guess it'll be in 2021.
Look forward to it.
Right on, and maybe I'll even see you in the rink in the meantime somewhere along the way.
I would bet on it.
Okay. Craig
Thanks,
Button from
Peter.
TSN. Thank you so much for your time and coming on the podcast, and stay inside and stay healthy till the world starts spinning again.
Yep, I'm with you. You know what, as I say, be well and keep well.
Right on, brother. Cheers.
Cheers.